Ever wonder what makes really creative people tick? Where do their ideas come from? What keeps them energized? What kinds of things get in their way? Is their life really as much fun as it looks from the outside? Hello, I'm your host, Lily Pierpont, and this is ArtStorming, a podcast about how new ideas come to life and become paintings, sculptures, plays, or poems, performances, or collections. Each episode, I'll chat with a guest from the arts community and explore how the most creative among us stare down a blank canvas or reach into the void and create something new. My next guest duo wasn't planned. Judy Tuwalestiwa was on my In a Perfect World wish list because I know her work and I'd heard her present at the World Hope Forum. She was part of a panel discussion called Your Brain on Art, which was based on a book by the same name about how the arts transform us. The book is by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. I've referenced the book and Judy's art practices in several of my podcast episodes because they're really inspiring. I'd also been to Judy's studio on one of the Galisteo studio tours, which happens annually about this time of year. But how this episode actually came to be was a little bit more miraculous. I was at an event at Santa Fe's Center for Contemporary Art called Discovering the Music of Paintings. The event was put on by Oliver Prezant of Opus, which deserves a whole podcast all by itself. It was an interactive event where members of the audience engaged with a large work of art in the front of the room, and then 3 musicians, a cellist, a clarinetist, and a violinist. With input from the audience about what we were experiencing in the painting, the musicians interpreted our responses. So we all got to hear the painting. Hard to explain, but it was amazing. Judy and Caleb happened to be sitting in front of me and made many thoughtful comments throughout the event. And when the event was over, the positive energy in the space was just palpable. We were all slowly getting up to leave, and I suddenly felt compelled to approach Judy, whom I had recognized as soon as she first spoke. It took about 2 breaths to muster the confidence, but then something else took over. I introduced myself, told her how much I admired her work, etc., and asked her if she'd be willing to be a guest on ArtStorming, and she said yes. And she said we should do it as soon as possible because Caleb, her grandson, was only going to be there for a couple more weeks. So right there and then, we scheduled something for the following Wednesday. I was over the moon, and the conversation that ensued did not disappoint, as you'll hear. Oh, and did I mention that thanks to her grandson Caleb, Judy has a TickTock following of over 5 million. Have a listen and you'll see why I, and so many others, are absolutely starstruck by Judy Gma, as she is known to her fans. I'm here with Judy Tuwalestiwa. How did I do?
Perfect.
That's a hard name to pronounce.
Very hard name.
Okay. And Caleb, what's your last name? I don't think I ever got it.
Sohigian.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
That's from my first marriage, Sohigian, Michael Sohigian. I was married to Michael for 25 years.
Okay.
So that's an Armenian name.
Okay.
Tuwalestiwa is a Hopi name. And
Your maiden name.
my maiden name was Averbach, which was a Ashkenazi Jewish name. And I tease Philip that I better die before he does, because if I ever remarry, I know that it will be one of those names without any vowels.
So what's in a name? What's in a name?
Actually, a fair amount. Like Tuwalestiwa means the wind making ripples in the sand. It's a beautiful verb.
Wow.
Like many Hopi names. And Philip and I took it together because his grandfather, Tuwalestiwa, when he went away, when he was taken to the mission, to the school, the teachers changed his name to Johnson from Tuwalestiwa.
Oh, wow.
So
That's a
Philip
story
was
in and of
Philip
itself.
Johnson,
Oh, like the great architect.
like the great architect, but he never related to that name.
Of course he wouldn't.
He never related to that.
And that happened to so many people.
To so many people. So when we got married, Philip said, I'd like to take my grandfather's name back. And would you like to share it with me? And then we decided that we'd be Philip and Judy Tuwalestiwa.
That's so cool. And were you practicing your art form then?
Oh, I've been an artist for about 55 years, but I met Philip in Chaco Canyon. We camped next to each other in 1984. But I've been an artist since I found art when I was 29 years old. And I already had 3 little boys. I didn't have my daughter yet. And the art became a profound passion. I had no idea I was an artist.
What were you doing before that? I mean, 29 is actually, far enough ahead. I mean, how old are you?
I'm 28.
Right.
Yeah.
It was right around your age.
Yeah.
If you think of your age and I already had Robert, David, and Aram.
You had 3 children?
I had 3 children. We went to, before that, I was trained as a teacher of English literature. I went to Berkeley for my undergrad and Harvard for my grad, and majored in English literature, which I loved deeply. And I did a lot of crafts. I remember doing a lot of crafts. And I painted a mural from Winnie the Pooh on my kids' wall. And I was very active in my community also. So I taught.
Well, the literature is obviously still a thread.
I'm so thankful that was my base.
Yeah, really. So say a little bit more about that, because obviously, let me just interrupt to say that you guys are doing a collaboration on a children's book. I mean, among other things.
It's become intergenerational. It's no longer a children's book.
Okay.
It's a myth for our time.
Uh-huh.
It's grown out of that.
The knitting, the visual, and the language is super important.
Yeah.
And because she brought me on basically as an editor to try to figure out how to put the instinct of the work into something that was easier to understand narratively. And she always talks about how good of an editor I am, but it's really because you taught me during middle school and high school in my English papers. I'd bring them to you, and then you'd show me how to edit so well and how to make it as simple as possible. And so I'm just bringing that gift back.
Oh,
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. This is so interesting.
It was so intriguing because the book Frog Dreaming, what started when Caleb was 12 years old. You're 28 now. And a few years ago, I asked you, could you help me? It's about dream and story. And it's written by a character in a novel that my husband and I are working on, that we've been working on for 2 decades. And this character is mentioned once, but you know her through her books. And what the problem is the way that I had done it, you could get lost in the dream world. And I didn't want the reader to get lost. I want them to be able to float in it and experience it and their own sense of dream. And when Caleb looked at it, and Caleb has a background in card magic and street performing and acting. And that, I think, was equally important in teaching you to be a good editor. You knew what to put in, what to leave out. You would study people as you...
Yeah, and something else we were realizing recently was that in card magic in general, it's so important to not confuse the audience. And there's because what you're trying to do is put them into a state of wonder or amazement. And there's a very fine line between confusion and wonder. And they actually look very similar, too, when you see someone experiencing those things. But they're completely different internally, right? One of them, they've lost the thread. And the other one, they've been with you along the way, but they can't believe it's possible, right? So they're both these, I don't understand the reality I'm seeing, but one of them comes out of not being with the storyteller, and the other one is, I've been following you.
Well, I'm totally in a state of awe and wonder right now, and we haven't even left the planet yet. So that's incredible. So what a combination of this magical realism that's sort of being woven into this context. And I'm sitting here, you guys are sitting in front of a piece that you're working on, Judy, that is composed of little glass shards, is the only way I would know how to describe them. How do you describe them? Little glass shards.
Little glass shards.
And they are of all different colors, and it's almost, they look the shape of small leaves. So it's like
fossils or something.
Yeah, and then there are these characters that are floating in a dreamscape. And so the conversation that we're having right now is kind of being represented in the artwork that's floating around the room. And already I'm in this magic space. I haven't lost the thread yet, I don't think.
That's great.
But yeah.
That is great. No, that's wonderful. This piece was started, there are a number of pieces that have frog and lizard in them. And then, of course, the book itself. And do we have a copy of it down here? I know there's one on the table in the front.
No, I can go grab it in a little bit.
We can grab one in a bit, and we can show you, because there's been so many iterations of it, and it's pretty much done at this point. It's we added one page, and I think it's finished.
So were some of these stories when you were little?
Well, 12.
Did Judy tell you the story? I mean, when you were little, before 12, did you were you a storyteller? My great-grandmother was a storyteller where she used to tell pixie stories, but I was wondering, do you have a memory as a little child of the stories that Gma would tell you? I love that he calls you Gma. I think that's so cool.
Well, most of my memories are just being in your studio or in the kitchen, just watching you make things. So it was that form of story.
And remember when you and Anna came down and we did the big body painting? I still have those.
My sister and I traced our bodies and then turned them into like life-size characters.
Well, there's the pieces that you...
Yours was very dark. Yours was very, very dark.
So the pieces that are just beginning over here on the wall to my right are also tracings of actual full-size arms and hands. And so this is a continuation of that.
That's very interesting.
What's happening right now is that we have the collaboration of Frog Dreaming, the book, and that is a specific type of collaboration because she's the artist and I'm the editor, right? There's a different dynamic to that than this current project, which we're trying to do kind of artists at the same level and create visual pieces together, which I've never really worked in her mediums. She hasn't collaborated in this way, and she's teaching me how to sift the powder onto her kiln and create these shapes. So that's what these were, these hand tracings. This was the first sort of idea that we were having, trying to explore this collaboration. It's.
Did you have flashbacks of when you were a kid doing the tracings of yourself, or did I just?
I mean, it was in this room, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was here.
It was in this room when I was like.
That was so much fun.
Probably when I was 12. I wonder if it was a similar.
I'll bet it was. I think you were around 12. You and Anna both.
That's interesting.
I want to talk about so much, but say a little bit more about the piece that you're working on now, and how did you decide to do this collaboration? First of all. I mean, it grew out of the book.
It grew out of the book. I was really wanting to discover a different dynamic for us. And we were wanting to restart our TickTock page, and we didn't really have a story for that. So both these things kind of came together, and the current TickToks are really about.
We also had, you were also in that workshop that I gave.
Yeah, I did
You came down and
came in through this art workshop Gma was doing.
It was a 3-day, was it?
3-day workshop. It was the sort of getaway that feels like psychedelics or something, like those.
So you live in Portland, Oregon, and so you came for this workshop that Judy was giving here in Santa Fe and Galisteo?
Yeah.
Okay.
In this room.
With cousin Rachel was here.
It was me and 11 women in their 50s to 70s.
Welcome to Santa Fe.
And we just all cried the whole time, and it was amazing. Yeah.
It was a great workshop. And Melinda was there.
Yeah.
The videographer, our dear friend.
Yeah.
And
this was after your illness?
yes.
Okay.
This was maybe 6 months ago.
And so say a little bit more, because, we've dangled it out there, the TickTock sensation. So you say a little bit more about, because all I know is that when I encountered you guys the other night and you said, oh yeah, and Caleb's here and we've got our TikTok thing, and it just went viral, but like explosively viral.
Well,
so
it started with, you showed me this piece. Yeah, you can go grab it. It's a sculpture by a 10-year-old girl that was in one of her art classes 40 years ago. And it's of a mother lying on her back in the middle of birth. There's a head coming out of her.
wow.
And her mouth is open in this primal scream.
Okay, we're looking at this
Really intense
extraordinary,
piece.
holy moly.
And then the little girl also sculpted these two masks, which was part of the assignment.
That
Yeah.
was the assignment I had. I ran and participated in many arts programs in the 1980s in Healdsburg, California. We'd get incredible grants. Lee Perrin was a fantastic poet, and poets have to really pay attention to budgets. And he knew how to do a budget and how to write. And we would get fabulous grants. We were paying artists to come into the schools and work $60 an hour. This is 1980.
Wow.
And we felt it was important to pay them properly. But I was an artist in residence for one program. And the kids would come to my classroom with their teacher, and the teacher would do the exercise also, because we were trying to teach teachers how to teach through process. And this time I showed a series of slides, because we used slides back then, to the kids of masks from around the world. And then I gave them clay and said, I'd like you to make a figure and make a mask for the figure. And little Anna came up and said, is it okay if I make this? She was holding the unpainted version of this. And I said, this is art. You make whatever you need to make. And this was a public school. And I said, you do whatever you have to do.
And what did she say with the masks?
So when she came up afterwards, of course it had the arm then, because it's traveled with me for 40 years. And it will be the centerpiece of the book, Where Does Art Come From? That I'll do with Radius in the next few years. So the sound, like Caleb was mentioning, the mouth, the baby's smiling, the head of the baby.
Which is coming out of her. This is extraordinary.
Is smiling. And the mother
is a little less happy.
But no, it's more the sound of birth. It really is the sound of birth. It's like a cry through the universe. And you're right, it's both pain and joy held in that mouth. It's amazing. And the mask, she said, sometimes she put it on the mother's face and says, sometimes the mother is happy and the baby is happy. Sometimes the mother is confused and the baby is happy. And sometimes the mother is happy, changing the mask again, and the baby is confused.
This was a 10-year-old child?
Absolutely. You give the right exercise and you give safety, and people can go to the deepest places in themselves.
That's what's amazing is she has so much art from children of the same caliber. This just is a particularly potent example. Yes. But so she showed me and
Bonnie Solo was here.
Yeah.
And I showed you this, and you
did the whole story, did the whole magic trick, really, like this little performance piece. And I saw it, and I just, for some reason, it occurred to me that this had to be a TikTok, that I wanted people on TikTok, this like addictive, silly platform that people are just scrolling through. I wanted them to witness this and experience deep art that a child did, make them feel like they could do it.
Well, that's just as brilliant as this is.
But the thing was, you can't just do that. Like, TikTok, because TikTok, you have to play with the algorithm, right? Because it's not like other platforms where you have control over who sees it. Like TikTok, it sends it to people, and if those people like it, it sends it to more people. So I didn't want to waste this just throwing it out there and seeing what happens. So we, over like almost a month, like 18 days, I think, we put out a few videos every day and slowly built this audience, and it kind of tried to create a character of Gma Judy, this artist woman with wisdom who loved her grandson and had all these insights to share. And it got really, really popular. Like, I think the 10th video got to like 250,000 views. Like,
so first you're just talking about, you're building the context. So there's creating framework.
Yeah,
it's before this.
But I knew we had to lead to this, because the goal was to lead to this. And
your goal was, and you didn't tell me a word about that.
That's true. Yeah.
You didn't say a word to me about that.
Well,
and even when Caleb said, Gma, we need to do TikToks. And I said, whatever you think, Caleb, that's fine.
I know, and
I'd never been on TikTok, and I just trust Caleb. And I just said, that's fine.
We'd come to lunch, and I'd just update them on the numbers a little bit. Like, oh, this is what's happening. But I made sure not to show her. And you've maybe seen like one or two.
Yeah.
She hasn't seen them because, I don't know, she's the source. I don't want her to.
Right. Well, that's part of your magic trick, right? Yeah. I mean, you don't want to reveal your. But yeah. So what was just out of curiosity? I obviously didn't do my homework and didn't know the TikTok and didn't see it, but you haven't either. So we're on. But what was the very first one you did? Like, how did you introduce?
The first one
Gma.
You had a show called The Dream Life of Objects.
Yeah.
Talk about that. The prompt that you were giving people.
So I had a show in 2019 at CCA called The Dream Life of Objects. And it was a wonderful, wonderful show, filled with work from different periods of my life. It wasn't a retrospective. I call it an introspective. And part of it, I had different objects that had helped dream me on a wall. And David Chicky curated it, and Laura Carpenter, and Trey Jordan designed tables for it, and they were built. I forget the wonderful man his name who built them. And at one end of the table had, this is one of the tables, but it was simpler. We've added shelves. There were Xerox copies of pictures of objects that have helped dream me, and then a story with it. And people could take those if they wanted them. But I asked them to leave a story about an object that had dreamed them. And I have 600 exquisite stories from a 5-year-old to 90-year-olds. Each one is perfection. I mean, they wrote the stories from their hearts, or they drew them.
So she had this pile of material of these dream objects from random people. And I wanted our initial videos to be kind of an endless, I didn't know how long it was going to take for this to catch on. So I wanted to just have a lot of content that she could just read one of these and we would put it out. So the first one was about a Santa ornament that was chipped. And we did those for a few days. We were putting out, I think, 3 a day, really trying to crank it out. But those really started connecting with people, and then kind of transitioned. There's a whole story arc, really, because we transitioned into talking about mental health, and then by the end of the trip, when I was leaving, like 18 days later, we were driving away, and I posted Anna's doll. And my girlfriend and I were camping out at Bryce Canyon and the video was just exploding in a way that even the other ones were nowhere near, and it was just hitting millions of views and just comments pouring in and everyone wanting to know where Anna was and could we track down this girl, like where was she, which started freaking us out a little bit because I'd been slightly too specific in the tagging of like where this person was from and what their name was, so we were worried that she was going to be tracked down, which you don't really want. So, like, she did not consent to that. But it absolutely exploded, and it got to 6.7 million views. And just constant comments still to this day.
Wonderful
you
comments.
You go on there, and there's just constant
But
comments.
what I
Very
find so
thoughtful.
extraordinary, the thoughtful is that for whatever context you created, because this is a very complex little piece to present to scrolly world.
We've given them the trust in this character of Gma, this speaker, that they wanted to hear what she said. And the first thing the video comes on and it says in text on the screen, "My favorite art piece." And then she pulls out this little cardboard box and she says, "A 10-year-old girl made this in an art class 40 years ago." And it just, you can't look away. And it's a very long video for TikTok too. It's like 3.5 minutes, and people watch the whole thing, and it's the whole story. And
you did the thing with the little masks on each part of the...
Yeah.
And then what people would write is things like, "I wish I could have had an art class like this. I wish I could have expressed what I really thought."
Yeah.
By the way, you were mentioning the first one.
Yeah, did you find it?
So this is it. This was written
The first dream object.
by a woman in her 70s. I think. "I have treasured an old Christmas tree ornament, faded, chipped Santa, from my family of origins tree. It symbolizes a time in my childhood when I wasn't yet aware of the tragedy of their lives. It was visited in small and large ways unto us, the children. It survived, and so did we, mostly." That's the kind of thing that people wrote about.
Wow.
The child wrote about a blanket that her dog used to sleep on.
A woman talked about a tattoo of a crow that she'd gotten for her son who died in the military.
Yeah.
Like, just these perfect images that symbolized their entire lives to some extent. And they're all one page like this.
They're all the single
Because they take
page.
like 20 seconds to read. So this was incredible TikTok content. It was so exciting.
And how refreshing from the from the typical any social media. I'm not that familiar with TikTok. I should be, but it's sort of a younger person's game. But anyway, I mean, what a wonderful way to use TikTok.
Right, because it's an addictive platform. It's the most
and get them addictive to something that's nourishing.
Exactly. Use that pathway to put nourishment, to make them want to create, to make them believe that they can heal.
So what are some of the comments that you've been getting that indicate that people are actually waking up?
Yeah,
Well, there was one the other day, which this is not a good answer to your question, but it was Gma was talking, and the comment was, "What this country needs is somewhere between this and AOC."
between Gma and AOC.
That's a pretty good comment. I think I might second that. How many likes did that one get? Yeah, I betcha. That's almost up there with my Oprah Dolly ticket. But anyway.
No, it's really, the comments are just, they're real. They're very, very real.
There are a lot
there's
about
no nonsense.
A lot of stories about how they used to create and how this has inspired them to start again. A lot about connections to elders and family members that they wish they'd been more close to, or that they've been inspired to call again. She's just such a voice of wisdom, and it is so refreshing to these young people.
But
Well, and the
at same time-
intergenerational exchange, the way you're doing it and bringing it, because one of the things we've lost is the storytelling and that thing that gets transmitted from generation to generation, and now you've figured out how to bring that back.
Because it's also, Caleb's storytelling is also very important. So what's happened, I think during this period, is not just elders teaching youngers, it's youngers also teaching elders. And that's pretty much what our relationship is. That's why it's so wonderful to be working on a piece from scratch together and having and exploring it. From my knowledge, I mean, I'm teaching Caleb how to sift and how to do this, but the ideas that we're working with.
I mean, the current leg of this piece is from a dream that I had 2 nights ago, where I had 7 dreams during the night, and I remembered them all, which has never happened to me. It was bizarre.
Who does that?
No one. It was crazy. Seven.
You don't even do it.
No, I don't. I haven't dreamed. Yeah, nothing like that. So I woke up and I wrote them down, and in one of them it was a retrospective of Grandma's art, and it was this large wall that had these dark, sort of organic forms of her paper-thin glass. And one of them stretched for miles and unbroken. So I wanted to try to make
That's pretty symbolic.
Yeah, right. So we tried to make one of these forms, and we did it with string on the kiln, and now we're trying to make it into a triptych. But yeah, we're trying to have the ideas come like organically in the moment from us. Like,
from each of us.
So when you say that he's teaching you, is it sort of like just being receptive to the transmission of his dream, and then what? To say a little bit more about how that dynamic
goes. Young
goes.
people today have incredible wisdom and knowledge. I mean, Caleb, you didn't start messing with the internet until late because you went to Waldorf schools, and so Caleb learned a lot about how to use his hands, and I do believe. Kant, K-A-N-T, said that this is the visible part of our brain. The hands
are the visible.
Oh, I haven't heard that, but I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
He's absolutely right. When I do a workshop, I watch people's hands to understand what to ask them next, to follow my intuition. What do I ask them next? Mm-hmm. What question do I pose that lets them take the next step? But I watch what they do with their hands. So,
yeah, and the card magic was really, I got to learn how to use my hands and the expressions there, but also it's reading their hands as well, because your attention is neck down, and you're watching them take cards and where they put their hands and where their tension is, and honestly, that's the biggest thing that it's the card magic that makes it so clear to me how to arrange the TickToks and where to cut, because it's all about attention. It's all about in magic we call it misdirection, but it's where do you direct the attention, and that's the same thing with the confusion, right? You need the audience's entire attention needs to be accounted for during the whole story, and if you lose it, that's where you get the confusion or boredom. They disconnect. And if you can have something leading their gaze the entire time, then you retain them. And that's what I've tried to do with the TickToks. And it's mostly.
And apparently it's working, because what you just said, you had another statistic for us this morning when you walked in, or something about.
Yeah, one of them had, once we've restarted, we have the highest one right now, which is 90,000. And it's still growing, this one.
When did you put it on?
Yesterday morning.
God, I'm trying to get 14. It's like,
I know.
Woo!
Well, see, and that's what I mean. Like, Caleb understands things that I do not understand how to do. I mean, I'm good at giving talks. I learned that. I had in my family, that was important. I was student body president of my high school, still close friends with all my friends from high school, we still...
And where did you grow up, Judy?
East Los Angeles, in the barrio. It was very multicultural. I was very, very lucky. Very lucky. We were poor, very poor. My parents were communists during the McCarthy period, so they didn't understand capitalism or how to make money. It didn't happen. So we lived in a duplex with my grandparents. My grandpa was a tailor of fine women's suits, and they were able to buy a duplex. And we lived in East LA, which was one of the poorest sections of Los Angeles, mainly Mexican, Japanese. The Japanese had lost their homes during the relocation, so they didn't have money. Black, and some Jewish kids who were Jewish families that were left that hadn't moved out of East LA. And I was just incredibly fortunate to grow up.
Yeah, I mean, maybe poor financially, but rich in multi-generational, culture and richness.
Multi-generational and the cultures, so rich, so incredibly rich. I mean, I'd go to church with Margie, who was Mexican. And it was high mass, and it would be in Latin. It was so exquisite. And I'd go to synagogue with my grandma. And I'd go to the small storefront churches with my black friends. And I'd go to temple with my Japanese friends. My parents, of course, were screaming atheists. I also learned how never to believe in an ideology. Because I saw what happened in my household with it. It was very troubled.
Interesting.
And I learned, it was like getting immunization against falling for any ideology. And perhaps that's why I became an artist. It's pure process, what I do.
Well, what I love about what you were saying about the intergenerational going kind of both directions is that typically when we think of the younger generation teaching us, it's to break through those patterns that we get very encrusted around. Yes. And that's, you bring a freshness to somebody who's willing to hear, eyes to see, ears to hear. But in this case, it sounds like, because you're hardly a traditional person that needed to be cracked open to let the light in, right? So there's a different kind of flow that's happening here.
Thank you, Lily.
That is so obviously going through on the TickTock thing. And let's just hope that this becomes, this kind of context, this kind of relationship, this kind of content, is what the world needs now. Is,
yes.
Love, sweet love, right?
Yeah. Love, sweet love. And very interesting collaborating with a grandchild. I have 7 grandchildren who range in age from 41 now. Matthew's 41, and Becca is 5. So quite a span. And Caleb and I are the main ones who collaborate. Though I love having my other grandchildren out. Their hands are on the wall in various places, and some of their pieces are around.
Well, that's also just, I'll let you get back, but this studio is not the kind of studio where you can imagine children running wild. I mean, it feels precious to me just because it's all so beautiful, but I can't imagine letting a under 6-year-old running wild in here.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, especially because I grew up where, we were barely allowed in the living room, let alone in a studio.
No, it's wonderful. I mean, they sit down and start doing art, and it's wonderful. But with what I realized with a grandchild, you have unconditional love. So to collaborate, we never argue. You can say, that doesn't work, Gma. We're looking at a page from Frog Dreaming, and that doesn't quite work. Okay, Caleb, what do we need to do? And I can say to Caleb, you might look at that, because you're doing some writing right now, and you give it to me, and I give you feedback on it. And because of the unconditional love, which I had with one of my grandmas,
and
wonderful. She was my storyteller, just like your great-grandma was your storyteller. And I think to experience that, then a collaboration, you're just completely open. over and over and over again. And it's wonderful to be able to collaborate at that level.
Well, and I think there's a huge hunger for it too, which is, again, as you know, the TickTock is proving that out.
Yes,
is that I think we
exactly.
really have a hunger for that kind of. We're also siloed in our, in our little things that we do, and the younger generation of all generations always feels like the older generation doesn't understand us, and so you're breaking that barrier down.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, even just like 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds are compartmentalized. Just the way that our society is laid out. And that's so unhealthy. We're supposed to be intermingling and cross-pollinating with generations. So yeah, I hope it's inspiring others to.
I think that Lily's right. That's what it's hitting.
Yeah,
is that deep need for that. And I think about the young woman who doing a GoPro on her 4-month-old child's forehead so that she can see what the child's reacting to and responding to. I mean, I just love that. I love the idea of even a 4-month-old having a voice.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard of people doing that on their dog, just sort of see what their dog is looking at, what it's like to just see everybody's knees and nothing sort of more than that.
But to see it with a baby. And
wow.
Especially if you're traveling, and see what the baby's noticing.
Yeah.
We have so many tools and so many ways, and it's so simple to connect across generations. And we have to do it. We need new myths. There's a figure in the piece here that is flying, and that's Icarus who never falls.
Oh.
Icarus goes too close. His father warns him. He goes too close. The father builds the wings. Icarus flies too close in his youthful ignorance, too close to the sun. My Icarus always flies. As a matter of fact, he becomes a guide for Frog in Frog Dreaming into the land of the dead. And he becomes a guide. So my Icarus never dies.
So obviously the original story with Icarus, there's some sort of the moral to the story is. So what's the moral to your story in the Icarus who never flies too close to the sun?
Is never fly high enough. It's the Icarus whose father believes in him, or is wrong. I don't know which is more powerful.
Or he's simply the Icarus of our time.
Yeah.
He's like a young person like you, who can take chances and learn from them. And he doesn't have to die because of it. It's not youthful folly.
Right.
We can forget that concept. So many young
so it's encouraging people
wise.
to take the risk.
And also to trust their own wisdom, no matter their age.
Yeah, and their intuition. If he wants to fly closer to the sun, he should be able to explore that and not be punished for it.
Not be punished, because I think so many myths, unfortunately, though they touch something about human character, are also very punishing. And the fairy tales, the Grimm's fairy tales, are always punishing.
Yeah.
And we don't need that today. I don't think it works well. I think, like Frog Dreaming, it's not punishing. It opens doors. It opens us to our own heart songs. I think even the Pieta, and I've always loved Pietas. When I was 19 and I was hitchhiking around Europe, which I still find amazing that I did that back then, but that was over 60-something years ago. I spent a lot of time in Florence, and of course I fell in, and there were no lines anywhere. There were no guards anywhere. I had the Duomo to myself. It was incredible. And I love the Pietas. I love them. But I think today's Pietas are being made all around us. The photograph, Jesus was a 30-year-old man. He was a teacher. He knew what was at stake. When I see a picture of an aunt holding a niece who's shrouded in a sheet, and the aunt has her hijab on, And she is simply broken into pieces in her heart, holding this dead child. That's the Pieta for today. Mm-hmm. Ordinary people, true innocence being destroyed. Emmett Till is part of the Pieta of our time.
Yeah.
He was a 14-year-old innocent who was murdered viciously.
Yeah.
And I think if we could recognize some of those Pietas and create new mythologies and new fairy tales for this time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a time of incredible change. Incredible change.
Well, I think that's sort of the role of the artist, is to guide us through these turbulent times. And I really feel like one of the reasons I'm doing this project is because I feel like there's, to say a crisis of creativity, but I feel like what's needed is for people right now to remember that they have access to something beyond just the traditional, go-to ways of doing things. And I think that's what's so brilliant about what you're doing with TickTock. You're taking a medium that we've gotten kind of lured into, numbed into using, and you're using it to wake people up. That's genius. It's just genius. It's what we need so desperately, and it's what I think is the great promise that exists for us now.
So in my book, Mapping Water, I look at the word genius. Actually, it's Genesis that I look at. And there's a whole history, of course, the etymology behind it. And both the word genius and Genesis are cousins, if not brother and sister. And they both come from a word from Sanskrit that means produced by worms.
Interesting.
So they both have their feet all the way back into the ground itself. But the other thing about genius is when it came into our language through Latin, it meant an inward divinity and an inward tutelary spirit, so an inward teacher. So everybody has genius, being able to live it out the way that Caleb can, by listening to his inward teacher.
Well, and
so
the Icarus that's allowed to, explore that and express that. That's so cool.
And doesn't have to die. It's a powerful word, the word genius. Mm-hmm. Because I do think that many people get to live out their genius, but many people do not get to live it out.
Well, going back to this 10-year-old child's artwork, I've seen I've seen it several times now floating around on social media, some statistics about a measurement that's done by, I don't know which organization, that more children are measured as genius, like at age 6.
Reading that.
And then as they go on, the next year, the percentage of geniuses in that same group shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until it's nothing. The implication is that we're all born geniuses, and then it kind of gets socialized out of us.
Our school system is...
Yeah, and the Waldorf system may be one of the more exceptions to that rule. But I know so many people who basically, who are art teachers, who have said one of the things they got to do when they talk to artists coming through the ranks is to help them, undo all of the things that they were taught so that they have that beginner's mind.
Tell them about your first experience making art in school.
Oh, when I was in 7th grade, I stayed up all night. Miss Rasmussen gave us an assignment to paint the rain, something in the rain. And my grandparents lived on a hillside in the duplex, and I stayed up all night painting the way the car lights went down into the asphalt in the rain, like it cut into the street. I was so fascinated by that. So I painted that, and I painted the little cars. And I took it in the next day, and Miss Rasmussen said, "You're not very good at art." And that's when I stopped doing art. And that's why when I was 29 and I went to the Van Gogh exhibit, and my heart opened again, as Van Gogh wished, I later read in one of his letters to Theo. that he wanted his art to open the well springs of a person's heart. And that's what happened to me. And I had to do art. But she shut me down. And again, she taught me how not to teach. That was one thing that I learned. Just like my parents taught me how not to believe in an ideology at the exclusion of everything else. They also taught me idealism. Like when I was a kid and I would have my birthday wish before blowing out the candle, it would never be for myself. It would be for peace in the world. Always. So, you get all these mixed things. What Miss Rasmussen did is, since I have always worked deeply from the unconscious, always, in my art, if I had been in touch with that part of myself at that point, it would have been dangerous for me. It was not a way that my family could see things.
Too vulnerable.
It would have been far too vulnerable. I was vulnerable enough. Instead, I took that energy and I put it into becoming a school leader and a participant in my community.
And a mother.
And
a mother.
Eventually, and a mother.
Yeah.
And a teacher. And so
that was all part of the gestation period.
Exactly.
To carry you till you got safe.
Yeah.
And then you could.
And then once I was safe enough, not completely safe, because I had a lot to work through. I did a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of art that I have never put out in public, dealing with my insecurities, my pain. I felt that it was important to deal with it in myself, not to put it out for other people to have to deal with. It wasn't theirs, it was mine.
I'm curious, was that the piece that you've talked about, or the project that you've talked about where you took one tableau or one canvas and painted over it hundreds of times, was that part of that exploration?
Yeah, that was part of both teaching myself how to paint and how to let a canvas tell the story, but also part of that. For example,
We'll talk about genius
painting,
in the way you just defined it. That's it. I mean, that's the epitome of genius.
And it's also what it is, such an interesting word, because it is listening inside, and it was not for the public. Yours, you're able to somehow put something into the public and be totally in touch with your intuition at the same time.
Yeah, and it's always a balance, because, I don't know, part of my double-edged gift, I think, from when I was a child was being very, very aware of what others liked and what others wanted, and that feeding into my intuition and sometimes getting muddied up. Am I doing something for my intuition, or am I doing something from your intuition? Right? Like, am I doing something that you...
Oh, like you were, the boundaries were sort of, like you talk about the boundaries between wonder and losing reality, but you're describing something like that within yourself.
Yeah, where...
A permeability.
An ability to service an audience can occlude your ability to connect with yourself. And that's been a lot of my work therapeutically with myself, is trying to get a separation there. But yeah, you're right. My first instinct is often to create things that can survive visibility, I guess, that I want to put out immediately,
and that you want to connect. I mean, and that's what the TickToks have done.
Yeah.
Well, what's so interesting too about that is that you talk to a lot of mid-career artists who have. I had a conversation last night with an artist who's sort of struggling between a new direction she wants to go with her art and what the gallery is demanding from her. Okay. And so this is that thing. So speak to that.
What I did in 1982, I had a show in San Francisco at Source Gallery, and again, a very negative experience. My dealer from Los Angeles, a very good gallery in LA, had come to the show. And afterwards he told me, he said, that show made me feel sick to my stomach. Years later, he told me that he was in a psychological crisis at the time, because he had just remembered something from his teenage years after his father died, and that he took it out on me. And I said, it's okay. I said, I needed to pull out a showing I had 4 kids at home, a difficult marriage at that time, and I needed to pull out a showing. And I pulled out a showing, and I figured, okay, I had rushed one piece for that show. That's not what he was talking about, but I had rushed one piece. And I decided I would never, ever rush a piece for a show again. So I I left the gallery, both galleries, and I said, 3 to 5 years, I'll have a body of work. I'll find a gallery and show again. Well, it was 15 years, and I had many, many bodies of work, including the continuing paintings. And I went into a total narrative phase of work that frog dreaming comes out of. I mean, it's so rich what's happened with that work now. The Tia collection bought a series, a 10-part series, that's completely intact because I wasn't showing. And I needed money, so I started doing workshops and teaching. It worked out. And as I said, when Ed called me and he said, I apologize so much for what I said. It had obviously bothered him deeply. And I said, nope, I needed to start showing.
Well, one of the things that's so extraordinary about so many of the stories that you've told me this morning is that something about your nature is that you take adversity and then you turn it into a positive experience. And I've heard you say at least 5 things that point to that, from what you learned from your parents about how not to do something, or what this teacher told you how not to teach, or that you pivoted. So you've taken an experience. And so there's this huge amount of trust that I experience from you in the process, trusting the process.
That's happened later, being able to see it as positive, as something
looking back on it,
that is part of the weaving of my life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And looking back on it, when Ed said that, it was so depressing and upsetting, but now I can see how useful it was.
Yeah. And so how does it sound when you hear a story like that? How does it teach you? What's the lesson?
What I hear from it is, at least in the way that you're retelling it, is a permission to respect synchronicity and respect signs.
Nice.
If you're feeling pressure or tension from some event, maybe you should respect that. Maybe you should let it push you, like jujitsu or something, where you're going with the flow of your opponent. So yeah, that's what I've gotten out of it is, if this thing is hard, or maybe I shouldn't be doing that thing. Maybe I shouldn't be struggling against that adversity. Maybe I need to be taking a break from that section of my life, or, I don't know.
Because it really does, I'm amazed at how it has worked out. Like having that whole Chaco series. And the Tia collection is doing a book on that series now. And each piece is 70 inches by 42 inches. And they're all interconnected. I was teaching myself how to be patient and not let anxiety drive the brush. And I thought, okay, if I make 10, each stretcher is made out of redwood. Yeah, they're all made out of redwood. I didn't have the money to buy.
Wow.
And so I was making my stretchers, and there was a redwood plant in Healdsburg. And Mike Lolleren's dad, and Mike was friends with your dad, actually, I think. And his dad was foreman there, and he would save me the redwood scraps. We're talking first growth redwood. And so I built all the stretchers out of the redwood.
I mean, you could just flip the canvases around and they'd be exquisite.
Beautiful redwood. Yeah. And what I set about doing was that I would begin canvas 1, day 1, canvas 2, day 2, till I had all 10 of them going, and I numbered them, their sequence. And then I simply started painting on each one. And if I get stuck on one, I'd move to another. And then I started moving them around, number 10 near number 1, and I'd connect them. And then the final, after this was 6 months, and in the middle of it, I went back to the desert again and experienced the incredible night sky at Mount Baker, which is at 10,000 feet, the campgrounds in Nevada. And the night sky entered. And when I finally put them all back together, 1 to 10, they started at daybreak, went through the complete diurnal cycle through night and back to daybreak again. And I had not planned it. And it's story within story within story within story. It's all narrative.
Incredible series. It's incredible.
It was really, and again, I would have sold one because I needed the money,
But because
I wasn't showing, and I was only painting, I think I was painting for the child within myself and for the healing. Like the Continuing Painting 3, that one has 100 paintings underneath the final red. And I photographed every one of them for myself so I could see the process. But there I was dealing with Jewish rage, the rage that I had inherited. Along with I always picture my grandparents as coming over from Europe with one bag of fear over their shoulder and one bag of hope. And part of their hope was that their children and grandchildren would get an education. And I got a great education. Yes,
I think the hope bag won.
The hope definitely won, but I had to deal with the fear too, and that's where the rage is sitting. That's where it sat. And it was a powerful series to do. Very healing, amazingly healing. I showed it to my therapist, and she said, "You've painted the therapeutic cycle." It was amazing. And that painting took 2 weeks and had 100 different paintings on it. Because you could only stay in that rage for so long. It was very cathartic.
I bet.
And they're good there's some good paintings in there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's so interesting. I think people are afraid of rage often, or they feel like it's their personal, it's too personal to share with anybody else. You don't strike me as somebody who's got a lot of rage going.
God. Anger and rage are things that I'm still working through. They're definitely an emotion that I do not feel comfortable expressing when it does come up. I think a huge part of my identity was my ability to contain rage in a household that had a lot of rage, and being the one person in that ecosystem that wasn't being overtaken by it. So I'm still unpacking that. I think I have to do a continuing painting or something about my rage. But
it seems to me like the rapport that you have is that when Gma says, this is something that you will get to the other side of, that you can trust that this it too will have its gestation period and you will come through it because Gma says so. I mean, I wish I had a Gma had said that to me, right? So I'm projecting, but I think that, there's something so beautiful there.
It's both saying so, but also visually actually living it out.
You've made me believe that healing is possible and very achievable.
And my kids grew up in a house with a lot of rage because I hadn't worked through my rage. And it was a very particular rage from my ancestors. A Jewish rage is what I call it.
Yeah.
That I had to come to terms with. I had to heal it. And I knew that I had to.
And so Frog is on the other side. And all these new stories that you're telling are what's available. I mean, there's a huge pot of gold at the end of that.
There's an incredible pot of gold by dealing with it. I think we have a country where people are not dealing with their rage.
A collapse between rage and power, that whoever can rage the hardest is the strongest.
That's a very interesting...
Or the emotion underneath the rage, because that's what we talk about a lot, is that rage is not a primary emotion, right? It's always covering something else.
It's covering something else.
Usually it's
fear
or
what I discovered in the continuing painting when I got to the heart of what was going on is the human condition. Death, birth, death, sorrow. And I think it's usually covering deep deep sorrow, generational sorrow.
Grief.
And people do not like to feel sorrow.
We don't know where to put it. We don't know how to alchemize it. Rage, it's easy to channel into something positive, quote unquote. Like,
Are self-justifying.
yeah, it's a very easy tool to wield. But grief, we have no idea where to put it, and we don't know how to smooth it over. We don't know how to make it feel seen. So,
And generational grief.
yeah, that's the thing,
the
is it's
sorrow
passed down.
for generations.
And then you don't even remember where it came from, and that makes it so much harder to unplant that
And you
seed.
still carry it in your body.
Yeah, definitely.
When I taught, the most important thing to me is that people feel safe. And when I taught it, for one semester, I'd work with kids who were really troubled. So maybe 6 at a time. The teachers would send them to my room. And I knew that what I could give them was a place that was safe, that they would remember in their body when they were ready and able to do the work to heal themselves. Mm-hmm. But if they didn't have that place, they could never come back to it.
Yeah.
Because they think that's the only option.
It's the only option, and they have to be the center of the entire thing.
I love that the etymology of the word courageous, courage, comes from the heart. And so to have that heart-mind connection is clearly the foundation for everything that's coming out of this space.
Yes, it is, and that's what Froggy has. He has to find his heart song before he has the courage, the heart, to be able to do what he has to do, to give death a heart. He has to find his own heart song first.
And this is what you're passing on. This is the correction of the, legacy trauma, the correction to the legacy creation of something that's being passed on in the song and in the heart. And it's absolutely fantastic.
And with the hope.
And with hope.
With the hope.
A big bag of hope.
We were laughing. I was on a Zoom with my high school friends, and we were remembering our class motto, which came from my father, because he said, "You must study Latin. You'll understand English better if you..." And we had a Latin teacher, as poor as our school was, Miss Henderson. Oh, she was fierce. And I learned Latin. So our class motto became Dum Spiro Spero, which means, while I breathe, I hope. It translates as that. And of course, the kids all started saying, "Don't spit on sparrows." That became the class motto. Don't spit on sparrows.
But say it again in Latin.
Dum spiro spero. Like inspiration and spero. While I breathe, I hope.
We're going to end it there. Well, thanks for joining us today. Please like and follow us on artstorming.org, where you'll find a list of our shows, a transcript of this episode with links to the guest page, as well as our other projects. ArtStorming is brought to you and supported by ArtBridge and listeners like you. Look for us on your favorite podcast platforms.